Got some notes once again. I like to write out my notes. Yes, I do. Because it helps in the process of, say, you're reading something and you can't completely memorize it. The best thing is to have notes. So hopefully me fumbling these pages doesn't mess up the clarity in relation to my sound. Because I just had to delete a video for that purpose. We're going to try again. So, Asia degree, February is the title of this video. February, as in sun, as in the daylight. Say as when daylight in fact meets the horizon, because to understand and know the seasons as in when the seasons change and they bring daylight savings time, and say certain particular seasons change the time forward. Why did I go like this? Change the time backward, well as forward. Yes, daylight savings time. We have it all, yearly. We're changing the time backwards and forward. So, February. February is usually dark, isn't it? Isn't it? Let me see. February is usually dark, I think, until 7 a.m. because it's winter darkness. It's almost like, say, if it's early morning, it's still somewhat night. Because daylight usually don't begin, if you're changing the time, say months in April, that's when, somewhere around that time, isn't that when the time, say, unfold, as in the time is changed so that it can start getting lighter outside much earlier? Let's see what I wrote in my notes. Okay, so February, as in the question of the daylight. I said if daylight in February doesn't start until somewhere around 7 a.m., then that neighbor, remember about the neighbor during the father's 911 call, and I'm going to actually make a video about that as well. The father, of course, took it upon himself to call 911 somewhere around the time of 6:30, when the mother had in fact noticed that Asia was gone, right? So the father called 911, and then on top of that, he said that a neighbor told him right on his street that the neighbor had in fact seen Asia leaving away from the premises or whatnot. And so this is why I'm going to go ahead and question right here based upon my notes. I said if daylight in February doesn't start until somewhere around 7 a.m., then how could the neighbor of Asia seen her before, say, 6:30 a.m.? Yes, I'm repeating myself. To repeat something enough is clarity. It's so you never forget. How could the neighbor of Asia's have seen her before 6:30 a.m.? That doesn't make sense. Because to know it's wintertime in February is to know even a possible sunlight doesn't come up, or even daytime doesn't arrive on the scene until somewhere around 7 a.m. That's strange. For a neighbor to say they seen a child outside in the heavy rain and darkness is to once again question the neighbor, as in, were they going or coming? Was that neighbor, when that neighbor on Asia Street told the father told the father that he seen Asia walking, and not the eyewitnesses, not on Highway 18. I'm speaking right here close to home, as in Asia's, on her street. Was this neighbor that said they seen her and the father reported it to dispatch on the 911 call, was this neighbor in a vehicle? Were they going or were they coming? That's what I want to know. Because that's strange in itself. For a neighbor to say, I'm gonna repeat that once again. For a neighbor to say they seen a child outside in heavy rain and darkness is to once again question the neighbor as in were they going or coming. Because even in that time frame, if they seen her, it had to be before or right around, somewhere right around 6:30, before, a little before 6:30. So that will be around somewhere 6 a.m. or even possibly 5 a.m. So what was in fact the neighbor doing? And then me questioning that in relation to the neighbor seeing them, and if a possible vehicle could have been involved with, say, the neighbor. Because see, we question everybody and not just the parents. To try to have only a little bit of information to go off of, it's to question everything right around that vicinity, up close. So the neighbor, if the neighbor seen a child, if the parents said that they witnessed Asia was missing at 6:30, then that neighbor had to have seen that young child somewhere about 6 a.m. or even 5:30 a.m. And yet, once again, sunlight was nowhere to be found. It couldn't have been. Because remember, light doesn't come outside in February till, say, around 7 a.m., 7:20, 7:30, somewhere around that time. So the time exchange is there's a big difference in time exchange right here, which is why I said and spoke on that it was in fact strange. What was this neighbor doing? I said before, I'm gonna make a video about that, even questioning the neighbor's involvement. And so when I spoke, was a neighbor going or coming to be able to see a child at that time, say around the 5 a.m. mark, even 6 a.m., I said, could a hit and run have been a factor in this? And could the neighbor have been a part of that process? Could the neighbor have in fact told the father that they seen that young child, which belonged to the mother and father, and told the father, because once again he was making the 911 call after, could a hit and run have been involved with this, say with the neighbor? And yet, I don't really think that would be a possibility. I'm thinking because an upright citizen, as in an honest individual, depending on their mindset, if they hit a child while coming and going and yet nobody's seen it and yet they're the family's neighbor, they would in fact not leave that child there to just die. They will possibly get rid of her body. But not only that, the neighbor more than likely would not speak that very thing out to the family, as in it being reported to the family by the neighbor himself, who could have in fact did a hit and run by accident and killed the child. Because he wouldn't want his name anywhere in the whereabouts, I'm saying, because he know himself, even police will question that. Somebody that say accidentally was out, so like a neighbor out somewhere, accidentally hit a child, they're possibly not going to even say to the father enough for him to get it on a 911 call that the neighbor said he seen the man's daughter, because even the neighbor will be too nervous and shaken up to even put himself in the situation, because he know that police would in fact possibly find out he was the one that could have done it. But I had to mention this neighbor. I don't know if it was male or female with this, but yet once again the 911 call of Asia's father, he spoke and told that the neighbor had seen her walking, as in leaving, possibly leaving her resident, and more than likely she was, in a sense, if the neighbor seen her, and yet I still don't believe even that. It doesn't sound right. So, because in that you would have to question what was the point once again in Asia leaving, but not only that, what was the point of the neighbor even being there in the first place? I wrote that in some notes. That video comes later. Yeah, once again, could a hit and run have been a factor in this, and could have the neighbor been part of the process of, say, that hit and run accidentally or purposely, and yet he's not going to, or she not, whatever this neighbor was, is not going to say that they could have in fact did that very thing, because they know that police has to still come investigate, and yet to live down the block is for that police to want to come and speak with that individual who told the father that they seen that father's young child. A neighbor is not going to put himself all in that if he was a part of something. I don't think. Because that in itself points to witness, right? But if a child was killed, it points to victim. And even police can delve much more further in the make and model of cars and all that other stuff, and questioning that neighbor of what was their whereabouts and why at that time. They're going to question, were you going to work? What was happening? Why was this young individual, fellow lady, whoever, out at that time? Or even looking around at that time enough to even see a young child at that age? Why was the neighbor there, I'm asking. So how does someone see someone if they're asleep? That's what I was asking. Not as in sleepwalk, but I'm still going back to the neighbor. I said, how does someone see someone if they're asleep? I'm saying many people are asleep at that time, if not getting ready for work. Because once again, all this, as in the neighbor seeing a young child, had to play out before 6:30. So to know that it played out as in a neighbor seeing a young child leaving her environment, as in that housing area, street, her own street, it's to say usually most people are just now rising at that time, around that time, getting ready, possibly getting ready to get up for work, to go to work. And yet to be a neighbor, a very friendly neighbor possibly, and say live down the street from a young child, is to make me still stand in question of, why were you there in the first place as in the neighbor? And why would you just watch and allow a young child to walk out at that time? Because it's still, that still can be, anytime it's dark, that can still be considered late at night. It is, despite it being early morning, because it's dark out. Where was the neighbor going? Where was the neighbor? I wonder how deeply did the police question the neighbor? Where was the neighbor going? Where was the neighbor coming from? See, some of this could even point to that, to question a neighbor. How are you seeing something at that time of day? You had to be doing something, I'm saying, the neighbor. To look suspicious is to call it out. And not just looking at the family, you're looking once again at everybody that surround the surrounding area, right? Let me see. I said that, see, some of the stuff I'm speaking out because I had to reread it. Once again, I said if the neighbor would have seen Asia walking, then it had to be before 6:30. Yes, no lights outside while spotting her. I don't think that was possible unless an individual was in fact going somewhere or coming home from somewhere, that being the neighbor. But where? What was going on with the neighbor? Why would that individual would have been, say, outside at that time? That's confusing in itself. If school doesn't start until, say, around 8 a.m., I think when I was going to school back at that age, our school, elementary school, started at 8 a.m. So I'm wondering if it's the same with Asia. If school started, if school doesn't start till around, say, 8 a.m., I'm thinking, why wouldn't a neighbor question why a child is outside walking on her own before that time? Because 6 a.m. or even 5 a.m. is a bit too early. If you check the timeline between the 911 call and when she had left, like, I can't even really see that child leaving at 6 a.m. Because sometimes even parents, though they don't open the door until the bedroom of a child, say to 6:30 a.m. to go in and check on them, some of these parents are even slowly rising themselves, as in wrestling in the bed, moving around. The parents at somewhere around 6 a.m., 6:10, 6:15. See, some people, it takes them almost a half hour, if not even longer, to get out of bed themselves. As in, they're sometimes already woke before the time that they go check on that young child individual, or many individuals in their home. Trust, many parents sometimes, once again, just because they're going to check on their child at a routine time, such as 6:30, sometimes them parents are in fact awake. They're awoke much more earlier than that. That's what I'm trying to say. So, say if Asia mom and dad, one of them or both of them was Asian mom and dad, if one of them is like, say, the average parent that wakes up somewhat a little bit earlier than their routine time of 6:30, then they're going to be somewhat moving around in their bed just enough to know if a young child is walking outside, as in sneaking outside, sneaking out the door, the front door, or even the back door. But if she went out the front door, a parent would in fact kind of know that, because there's even sound effects, and even that, a child, say, sneaking out at that time. To have a routine of 6:30 a.m. to go check on a child is to possibly wake up even before that time. And yet sometimes, once again, grown individuals don't even make it out of the bed, which is at that time, which is why I said sometimes some of them are just laying around until it's time to get up. If you got a routine of 6:30, many individuals, oftentimes they'll lay in the bed despite them being woke, and just lay there and say till their body is ready to get up, until they got to force themselves to say, you know what, it is now 6:30, I have to go ahead and get up. I don't want to get up, but I got to go ahead and get up. So to relive the night is to take it there. To relive a night is to take it there, as in all these unseen individuals being unseen, heard, found. What was that saying I said? Unseen, unfound, and unsound in the middle of the night. Trust and believe many adults. I am saying this for the third time. Trust and believe many adults that have children that say have a routine of waking up the children at 6:30. Many of these individuals are in fact laying down and not sleep before 6:30 a.m. They ain't sleep. Many of them just laying there. Many of them is in fact waiting for the alarm clock to go off. Because sometimes many people, sometimes as in parents, I myself don't have children, but to be over other individuals' house, as in spending the night, even when you're young, is to pay attention. Some parents, adults, are even restless in the night. Remember, I have a mother myself, and my mom wakes up super early. And there's been times I had to pee, as in get up, go to the toilet, and I'm wondering, why is my mom up? What is the point in that? So I'm saying, some of these individuals, as in adults, are wide awake from the beginning. And yet I think many of them is not saying. Because even for a neighbor to be wide awake, as in on the alert enough to see a young child walking down the street in a heavy downpour, is to say something in itself. Was the neighbor even real from the beginning? I question even that. Or was that made up? Was the neighbor even there, as in seen, or was the supposed neighbor supposedly there in the 911 call by the father stated to cover somebody's own tracks? That's my question. That's even scientific in itself. Let me see, if somebody was to do something, whether it's on purpose or by accident, and yet they want to cover their own tracks, will they in fact say a neighbor was able to be there enough to see their child or whoever, or any young child, in the dark, because I thought it was heavy rain. I thought it was a heavy drenched downpour in a room that if you see somebody from far away, oftentimes you don't even know that it's them, especially if they don't wear a coat in the middle of the night. And yet this still had to be somewhere around still the 4 a.m., 5 a.m. mark, or going into 6 a.m. And yet to not be able to see something from far away is to in fact have obstructed vision. It's to have obstructed vision in the rain. If all the other eyewitnesses said they couldn't make out, this makes, okay, you know what? Common sense is completely coming out. If the eyewitnesses who drove past the young child or somewhat was right there, close enough to be by that young child to make out supposedly that they saw her, as in the description when her going missing, as in what she wore, the all white and stuff like that with the sneakers, if the eyewitnesses were in their car and they were close up enough to try to see if that was a young child, they were in a car, a vehicle, with windshield wipers, right? I'm wondering if that would have in fact obstructed the view just a little bit, say in your car seeing something. But once again, for somebody to be that short, I'm saying if the eyewitness really saw something that could have been there, maybe not been there, such as young Asia, if the eyewitnesses was that close, say, coming up on her, remember, if you can't barely see coming up on a child in a downpour of rain, then how do you know it's a child? But for them to be that close is to say they must have been able to see that was an in fact child. And yet going back to the neighbor, that neighbor, let me see, could have not been that close to Asia enough to see that that was in fact her. Not in that type of rain, unless say that individual was looking out their vehicle, say sitting in the car, or looking out their house, glancing out as she was going past. Because the more a person come up closer to you, the more you're able to identify what they are, as it being, say, a young boy or a little girl. And yet once again, heavy rain presents an issue of obstructed view. Because see, even to sit in the rain, say as in a car at night at that time, and say you be a neighbor, say you seen Asia, right, walking past, is to say if you were in fact the neighbor in your car seeing her, then you had to have your windshield wipers running if you were in the car. Because a heavy downpour is to block off vision, and yet to sit there with no wipers going and say with the key turned off as in the car completely not running, is to say you didn't see anything there. Because remember, to sit in a car outside somewhere and watch a young child go past you is to see that not only is the windshield drenched, but all windows all around the car are in fact drenched. And yet no side windows have windshield wipers. So how could the neighbor in fact see her? And yet if they're on the inside of the house, I question that very same thing. If there's a heavy downpour, usually when you're in a car, you go through movement. Let me see. Like the eyewitnesses said, if they were driving, they were actually going through. That's like aerodynamics in a sense. You're driving through rain. So the faster or how much slower you're driving is going to impact your vision even the more, depending on the speed, because even air, as in the car traveling through, the air is going to in fact push more rain on that windshield. So you're going to be somewhat semi-blinded by the rain, which is why the windshield wipers are there in the first place. And yet to sit outside in the car when no windshield wipers running, or not even a car running, but the windshield wipers more than anything, is to know you cannot in fact see anything, even in standing still. with no slow motion involved. You standing still, you're not going to be able to see. That's just common sense, because a downpour is just that. It's just coming and coming. If individuals said that they've been outside enough to walk in downpours before, and it's so heavy that it's getting in the way of your eyes, and yet you don't have no sunglasses or glasses on to protect your face, it's to say if it can do that sort of thing to your vision, then it has to be able to do that sort of thing to a parked car. And so I don't think that individual was there, as in the neighbor. Unless they were in fact in the house seeing her walking, and they were watching her walk from afar. That's what I'm trying to say. And yet to peek out a window, or even a bedroom window, depending on how some houses sit and you can see out your bedroom window, is to ask, in fact, why were you peeking in the first place? Because isn't it early in the morning, late at night, at that time, for a neighbor to be looking out and just see a child walking, right? Because see, even blindness stands in that. The heavy drenching downpour and the rain cracking up against the window. Some people can see through it, and yet other people can't. I'm thinking, as they're looking out while it's dark, as a young child walk out, and yet I still question of how dark that street actually was for a neighbor to be able to look out his or her window, say as in peeking out, and then just notice a young child, 9 years old, living up the block somewhere, walking past their house as the rain is drenching them and the windows and everything else, all the cars around them. How do you see that being a neighbor? Got to question these sort of things. Let me see. Wait, let me pause for a minute. If the mother checked in on the kids at 6:30 a.m., then it shows Asia could have left the house before. We know that she did. So the question is the neighbor, and right here, the sighting. The sighting stands out. That sighting of the neighbor in the 911 call made by the father saying that the neighbor told him that the neighbor seen the child. This whole sighting in which the neighbor stated is completely, totally off. It's almost hypocritical in a sense. It's not funny, and yet it is, because to see something that's completely weirded out as an off, that is just, come on, man. Certain things just be so telling, is what I'm trying to say. It be just so telling. So the neighbor took a time to just watch a child just walk past his or her home, and then not said nothing, and then not did nothing about that situation. As in possibly going to call the parents to say, you know what, your child is leaving super early. And yet, see, everybody has a routine in life. Some people spontaneously get off their routine, and yet it's been said most individuals that carry out a everyday, what do you want to call it, everyday work schedule or something like that, are prone to get up and go to bed sometimes at the same time. And yet to break the schedule, to break that schedule routine is to start to identify in the realm of, once again, what was this person doing, as in the neighbor? Because the reason why I mentioned the routine, this clock is so irritating, my mom's clock. I think what I'm going to do, because she is in fact in another country, right? I think I'm going to take the battery out that clock until she gets back, because it drives me nuts. Every time I get on video, that clock wants to just constantly be racking, going off. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Wait, because of the clock. Let me rewind back. Let me rewind back. Oh, the routine. I said that every working individual oftentimes form a routine of when they're going to go to sleep as well as when they're going to wake up in the morning. Your average individual don't like to go off their routine. A lot of people get set in their ways is what I'm trying to say. Right? And so if this individual, such as the neighbor, saw Asia walking in the way that it was told to her father during that 911 call, if the I got my Playboy hat on. Hopefully that's not inappropriate on this video as I'm making it. I didn't want my, because sometimes when you make a stuff about children, you don't want to have stuff like that that represent inappropriate things. Going back to what I was saying, I'm sorry. But if you have a routine, even in coming and going to sleep, waking up in the morning, you are in fact setting your ways as an adult. So you're not going to want to break that routine. So what me saying and mentioning about the routine is, if the neighbor saw Asia there, and say the neighbor is used to going out at that time, then the neighbor would have in fact knew something was wrong with the young child. Listen to me when I say this. Understand a puzzle piece. To be a neighbor and have a routine, as in going to work at a particular time, say before 6:30 a.m., in which the mother and father didn't find out Asia was gone until say 6:30 a.m. The routine has to play a part even in this with the neighbor and the sighting, because to not see a child there every single day on the street walking in that form of matter is to know something in fact could very well be wrong. The neighbor, I'm saying, noticing and witnessing this. And so the neighbor would have in fact involved themselves. I'm thinking you wouldn't have a routine where you come to work, if the neighbor got children, or even if they don't, where you say, I got to be to work at a certain time, so I got to get up. I don't like how this, let me turn this head around, because I just feel that I love Playboy though. Rest in peace, Mr. Man, the one that had died. But I just feel like while I'm making this, that's highly inappropriate, be talking about childhood matters, and then you got a Playboy hat. It don't seem right. Now, anyway, you got a routine. So if your routine is coming and going to go to work early in the morning, then that's in fact something you do every single day. And yet, once again, to not notice a child is in fact there during that time, as in that being her routine, is to know something in fact is off. Something is at play there is what I'm trying to speak on. It took me this long to actually get there, and yet it has been said. Neighbors, in fact, have routines. So if Asia would have see, some kids have a tendency and a habit to run away from home, say when abuse is going on, and yet other neighbors, if they're set in their ways and their routine of leaving at certain times, and say Asia would have took it upon herself to even go outside at night or early morning like she did at that time, is to know whoever had routines, the neighbors, as in the neighborhood, other individuals would have in fact seen her on numerous occasions if she had a habit of that. I seen a video of a young boy who was in Arizona that had a habit of sneaking out at night. And I guess he was adopted. His body ended up being found. Yes, it was. But his neighbors knew about him sneaking out at night because he would go knock on their door begging for food. So some children in fact do that, and yet to do certain things like that is for other neighbors to know. Trust and believe, if a child has a habit of, say, sneaking out at night because of, say, abuse or something like that, the neighbors would in fact know. They will see them. Because, see, some of these neighbors be coming in even at night, either staying out late at a party or driving in late from somewhere or whatever. So they would have in fact seen that individual making it a point of habit to do that very thing. And yet to not see, for a neighbor to not, or many neighbors to not see this sort of thing as Asia doing that, like that other young child I spoke of, is to know she might have not been the individual to do that sort of type of thing at night or even in the early daytime, or just leaving her house like that and just walking down the street. Neighbors are prone to tell it. That's what I'm trying to say. Listen to me when I state the honesty. That in itself is almost conclusion. A neighbor will tell you. A neighbor would in fact tell you. I don't know whether a guilty neighbor, I don't know how that mindset is, but I just understand in the realm of the honesty, a neighbor will tell you, because remember, most neighbors are nosy anyway. They like to gossip. Many of them do, especially older people. So I question the realm of how old was that neighbor that said that they seen her. How old was this neighbor? If Asia, when I said that neighbors will tell, because I said before, if the little girl had a tendency, say, in trying to somewhat lightweight run away in the middle of the night, other neighbors would have known about it. Yes, they would. Yes, they would, because see, it's even some individuals that stand out and sit on their stoop late at night, and yet many of them wouldn't do that thing, say, in the midst of February. That type of thing many people do in summertime. I've seen it. Yes, I have. I've seen it in my own neighborhood where I came from. It'd be late at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, and such is still outside. You know, and it's real early in the morning. Usually young guys do that type of thing. Very, very young guys. Other people, older people, a lot of times ain't gonna take time to do that because they're too concerned about being robbed. I know I would. Where I came from, I don't take a chance. Let me tell you, I don't. Too much fear comes to mind. Okay. So I said about the routine of the neighbor. I'm wondering what could have happened. Oh, I said, I'm wondering what could have happened between the hours of 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. As in the gap, the time period, the time span, right between the time of 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. what in fact could have happened. I'm saying something is missing. Could it have been the key? As in somebody forgot to lock the door in the middle of the night, or were they out all night, as in partying all night? There's a gap. There's a time gap. Let me rewind it again. Let me say this one again. That way because even when I repeat enough, I won't forget myself. I said, I'm wondering what could have happened once again between the hours of between the hours of 5 a.m. and the hours of 6 a.m. as in the gap. I'm saying something is missing. Could it have been the key, as in somebody forgot to lock the door in the middle of the night, or were they out all night, partying all night? Because to know a young girl is missing at that time, and yet for a neighbor to be somewhat of an eyewitness around that time, is to ask that neighbor what all did they see besides Asia just walking down the street or even out the door. What all did this neighbor see? What all did the neighbor see during the time gap? Because even the neighbor, once again, it's a repetitious nature standing here. Even the neighbor had to be standing still at that time. There's no way that the neighbor could have seen her somewhere around. The neighbor could have not seen her around 6:10, 6:15, 6:20, or even 6:25. Because remember, to get away, as in run away, is to not really go very far at that time, because remember, police will be showing up around that environment. And even as police was coming on the way, it's to say they would have in fact seen her, as in drive past her and say once they got to the house, said that was the young child we just seen. So something about that time gap right there does not add up. Did somebody forget to lock the door? And yet the mother stated that when she woke up, the door was locked. Which that's strange in itself. I'm saying if a kidnapper is involved, that's strange in itself for the mother to even mention that she got up and saw that the door was locked. Because usually a very distraught mother oftentimes bypass that very thing. I'm saying in the information. Like she's not really going to pay, let me see. Or maybe she will, because once again, but still, that still don't make sense. I'm thinking if my child ran away and I come out in the interview and I say one of the first things I saw was the door was locked, and yet my child could have possibly be kidnapped. Maybe that's why she said that. And yet for the family to think, or possibly whoever to think, even the public to think the young child run away, is to more than likely not even mention the door in the first place. That's weird in itself. I'm saying the door being locked. Because if a young child ran away, there will be no point as in the focus being on the door being locked. Because remember, everything that identify her is on the outside of the house and not in fact on the in. As in tying the information together, if I'm a mother and my young child say goes missing, the only way I could see myself making sure that I mentioned that I seen that the door was locked is if I didn't want to present myself looking guilty. I'm saying before police, if I'm a mother, the only way I will mention that I saw that the door was locked is to somewhat possibly take the guilt off myself, because I don't want police to think I had anything to do with that, right? I'm thinking if a person was on the inside of the house and say it's a possibility their child ran away, then why would the focus be so much on that door being locked? Because once again, the child left the house, didn't she? Supposedly. The child left the door supposedly. This whole story is completely messed up. Even the precipitation in relation to this, as in going out the front door. The whole story is a complete mess. Because usually a very distraught mother, if she's really distraught and the focus as in everything is being focused on her being kidnapped outside of the door, because remember the book bag represents that she left as in outside of the door, running away. That's what running away means, right? And so a mother parent really wouldn't focus on the inside of her house as in the door being locked. She will focus on the other side of that door. Like, where could my child have in fact been? Her focus will be solely on the outside of that house, is what I'm trying to say. And not on that door being locked as in the first thing she saw. I thought that was weird. That stood out to me a lot. Because to have a young child and say have her go kidnap, and yet all the items are showing in a sense she could have possibly ran away, it's a question, where was she going? But not only that, it's to not even mention that the door was locked. Why would you mention that? Something maybe I'm not seeing, but why would you in fact mention that the door was locked if a kidnapper is in say walking the streets with your child? Because didn't she run away? So that child would have, in fact, if she ran away, locked the door behind herself. I'm thinking that could be a possibility. Something don't stand correct in this. Something is like not right, man. I'm telling you, something is completely off. Clearly thrown off base is what I'm trying to say. To see something is to recognize it. To see something is to recognize it. As in the door. But to see something is to recognize it, right? But sometimes some mothers are so distraught to the very fact that their own children is gone, that's one thing they don't even pay attention to, is the door being locked. Because remember, to have a child run away or even leave away in a getaway car is to want to know, as you a parent, where is she going? And not only that, your sole focus is going to be on that until, say, the police question you as if was the door locked. And then you might start speaking in interviews about that, because once again, you don't want to make yourself look bad in the eyes of the public by coming out telling that you possibly accidentally left the door unlocked. So a mother, to prevent the guilt being laid on her, would in fact tell the public in interviews and everywhere else that she locked the door. But I can't even see me, because see, if my dog went missing, or even my own niece went missing, a young child, that's enough to flip you out. I'm saying in the mind. Some people go crazy. I tell you, I bet it's right now, people in mental institutions possibly right now, that their child went missing, they went crazy after that, right? So, because you get too distraught. And you get so distraught that you don't see anything else. Everything else completely bypass your eyes, even in the form and fashion of the door being locked. Trust and believe me when I say this. If a mother ever loses a child, as in the child comes up missing, her eyes is not going to, in fact, being on that door being locked. How could it be? Her child is gone. She gonna run. Let me tell you, and I ain't even got kids. All I got is 2 dogs. But let me tell you, if my dogs was to ever go missing, and I'm in this house, as one of my dogs did, but come to find out he was up under the bed, right? I flipped all the way out. All I did was hurried up and rushed and opened the door to look outside, because I know the type of hyper dog he is. He's prone to run right past me as I'm coming in. And so during that time, I didn't check no door. I don't even remember the door. All I remember is running out the door to see where he was at. So a distraught mother is going to do the very same thing as if she noticed her kid is not there in bed where the child should be. Her focus and her attention is not going to be on the door and whether it was locked. It's not. Because see, any distraught parent, once again, I'm replaying again what I just said. Let this detail meet your eyes right here in the here and now. Any distraught mother, her mind completely turns off. Listen to me when I say that. Anytime a child has gone completely out of sight, your average mother pay attention to nothing. She can be so distraught she almost damn near get hit by a car, running out trying to see if her child is on the other side of the door on the outside, and running out in the middle of the street while oncoming cars coming trying to see where's her baby at. Really loving mothers a lot of times don't pay attention to the lot of detail as tragedy is going down, as in a missing possible found. They don't. Their mind is too overly consumed with the matter that something is missing and I need to find it. Something is completely missing outside of this house, my baby, in which I have completely carried for 9 months and gave birth to. And so to know and understand that is to freak out, completely freak out, and not see anything. A mother could be, let me tell you this, a mother could be in her own house, notice before she checked that bedroom, she could have had a whole pot of food, as in a skillet with grease and everything, frying on the frying pan. And once she see that her child is not in bed after she done opened that door and called around the room, and then even in the house, walked through the house calling out her name, and notice that the young child is nowhere in the house to be found, that mother will be so distraught in extremity, not knowing where her child is, she'll allow that food to in fact burn on her stove as she's zooming out that front door to go see where her child is at, because something is not right. If the child is not on the inside of the house, more than likely she's on the other outside of the door, in which I need to go find her. And so even though I got a full plate of food frying on a skillet and possibly burning, I can care no less about that. I'll just leave it to burn because I got to go find my baby. So how is a person like that possibly able to leave some food? And they never said what the mother was doing before she walked in the bedroom, but I'm just speaking in examples. If somebody could just leave some food, say possibly frying on a skillet, enough to say possibly burn up the house by accident to go see where their baby is at because she's missing, it's to know they're not going to pay attention to a door being locked. How could they? The focus is right where it needs to be, on the missing child. Running outside and running to the grandparents' house or even the aunt and uncle who live up and down the street. So I'm saying that point right there in itself stood out to me the most. That locked door. The mother just in fact knowing that a door was locked. How could you know a door was locked? Anybody else that had missing children that just come up missing at that time is not going to see any door. They ain't seeing anything. Matter of fact, nothing in that environment is more important than their child themselves. That's what I'm speaking on. That's the question to the mother. How did you notice the door was locked? Maybe it's something I'm missing. Because see, even us, many of us are how old? And to be even set in our ways is to know and understand when you constantly go in and out of door, you fail to sometimes realize whether the door is even locked or even latched. As in the door being possibly pulled all the way closed because you've been doing it so much. Yes, it does become a habit to remember, as in you're locking your own door, and yet it's a subconscious thing. When I said about the habit, you're doing it. But once again, to see is to see is to tell, which is what that possible mother did, as in possibly realizing, as in paying attention that the door was in fact locked, and yet and still, to me that was kind of like out of place. It was totally out of place, because I'm thinking usually when somebody come up missing, you wouldn't really focus on, she didn't completely focus on the door in the interview, but she did say that the door was locked. And I just was like, man, that was so weird for her to mention even that. Especially if a young child walked down the street somewhere. Like, why would you make that part stand out the most? Unless you didn't want to be questioned by others if, in fact, the door could have or have not been locked. So in a sense, so that no guilt would stand on your hands, because see, sometimes even these parents will come out their mouth and say that their door was locked, whether it was or wasn't. And yet, once again, they don't want to stand there looking guilty, even in no testimony, or say the door if it wasn't locked, and say somebody crept in slowly. A parent don't want to be ostracized in a sense by the public, as in put down in the realm of public awareness. Because even the public will go up against you to say, well, why did you even leave your door open in the first place, as in being fully unlocked? They will ostracize you for that thing. So that make me question of, is that why the mother came out in the interview and said the first thing that she noticed was that the door was locked? I know for me, if I had a baby and they went missing, I ain't paying attention to nothing. I ain't gonna pay attention to the door, nothing, unless say the door was cracked. Because to be too on the move trying to find your missing child is to be just that. You become almost tunnel vision, where you can't see. You don't really have what is the word for it? Why was I gonna say infrared vision? That don't make sense. But you know, the vision that's on the outside right here, you know, we got where we're looking straight forward, but we can see stuff on the outside field as we're looking. But still, once again, for anybody to go missing, that's even for an elderly person. I'm sure it's been elderly people that have been living with their son and daughter that had possibly went missing somewhere in the daytime and even at night. Matter of fact, my mom, one of her close best friends, she went to kindergarten, grew up and went to school with all her life. Her father is in his 80s or something, and he sometimes go out at night. He want to be sometimes off in his own little world. That's what he told his child, his daughter, that take care of him. He don't want to be bothered with the family, so sometimes he just go off on a little walk, going here and there, right? And then the police have to take him back home to be out that late, right? But he usually leave out somewhere around 9, 10, 11, somewhere around that time. Police always take him back home. But I'm sure even in that, she don't even think if the door is locked when he come up missing. I'm thinking many of these people, period, who are in fact taking care of their elderly adult parents don't think of that. Soon as the adult parent go missing, the elderly, they don't think of, was the door locked when I went out? That's not usually in somebody's mind. Unless it's presented to police, unless it's presented by police, did you lock the door? Because see, even somebody in their right mind any time of day will know to lock the door, but not all the time. Some people don't lock their door. Some people keep their door unlocked even in the middle of the night, late at night, right? So say if the police said they're questioning her, well, did you lock the door? Knowing that she is somewhat in the South, because even in the South, people have been known to sleep with their door open late at night. Even their front door wide open. And yet I've still heard people carry shotguns. Yes, I've heard that. So don't be going up on people's porches in the middle of the night. You never know what might meet you in the process of somebody owning a shotgun and blowing you away because you're stepping on their premises. But you might be want to knock and say, sir, you might want to close your doors late at night. But that's off the hook. I won't say that's a crooked link, as in a crooked piece, as in the mother seeing that and saying that the door was locked. But who focuses on that? I'm focusing on it right now to question that very thing. Because see, if a mother will have gotten interviews, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit off right there, as in the gathering of information. Maybe I'm questioning that too much, because maybe that is right for a parent to say that, you know, that the door was locked because of possible kidnapping. But then once again, I'm thinking if a mother is distraught over her missing young child, she will pay attention to something else. She will pay attention to something else in, like, I don't know, in the environment or something. Or maybe she was just distraught enough to say about the door. I don't know. You never know. But to not know is to question. Usually a person who would see someone, oh, that was about the neighbor when I went back to about that. I think I said that before. Usually a person who will see someone in that time will be someone who's pulling out at night and just pulling into their driveway, or someone leaving out for work. Yeah, I said that. That's basically it. That's basically it over the neighbor in relation to February, because it gets very cold in February. It still continue to be dark in February. And not only that, the rain is very cold in February. But the neighbor, who was the neighbor? Who was the neighbor? How far down did the neighbor actually live from Asia's house? How close did they live? And did they in fact live on the, I know they lived on the same street, but did they live on the same side of the street? We will possibly never know, because once again, that's in the police records as in detail. But still questioning from the outside looking in is to size down something, as in decipher it down. That these neighbors share the same street, as in the same sidewalk. That's what I'm in question of. Did Asia and that man, I don't know if they was young or old. I'm thinking they possibly was older, because to see somebody and possibly own a house, maybe. I know young people own a house, but older people more likely. To see somebody is to ask, did that neighbor share the same sidewalk as you? Did they have sidewalks? See, I need to look further into that. My head is itching. I need to look further into that, as in how the community set was, as in the layout. A Google search can only give you so much information. But I know even rural environments, such as highways, in which supposedly Asia walked, may more than likely didn't have sidewalks. We know that some do. I mean, I'm thinking, don't they? Rural. In the environments where I've been, there was no sidewalks, but every city to state is different. So, and the reason why I say that is because that wasn't a really highway. They just considered it a highway because it was in rural environment, right? But to live in the home environment offside of that arena of the highway is to still know you have to have a sidewalk in your neighborhood, as in right outside of your house and going down the street of your house to meet the end of the block. And so for the neighbor to see you is to question how dark it was, even though we know it was dark. But was there light poles outside, such as lamp posts, as what you like to call them, lamp posts, so that you could be guided enough along to see as you're going, being 9 years old? And not only that, did the young child, Asia herself, walk past that neighbor's house directly? See, because to share a sidewalk from house to house and walk on a public sidewalk going down and be on the same side of the street, your owning houses on the same side of the street, Asia's neighbor and her, is to say they could have in fact possibly seen her, right? But how dark was it? How dark, how set apart was the street lights? Even in that, because see, sometimes even in rural neighborhoods, you might have a lamp post, like something, a lamp outside of your house, right? But then get into the next house is possibly dark. In the neighborhood where I came from, it was dark like that. We had a big street light, and yet I came from the hoods of the hoods, the ghettos of the ghettos. And yet even those areas are equipped with lights at night, but we had the big street light. But that was only enough to light up, say, until you got 3 or 4 houses down, where there was in fact another big old street light. So I'm still in question of the neighbor in the realm of him seeing her possibly even walk past her house, because for her to leave out her house and say walk down the street and say this neighbor to be able to see her, like they said they saw her with this rain drenching and downpouring, which blocks your vision, it's a safe for them to be able to see her that much. Is either they had to have witnessed her come out her house, and not only that, she must have had crossed the street over to their side if they don't both share the same street. I'm thinking, wouldn't a young child, in order for you to be able to have full visibility and the street being somewhat semi-dark in that drenching downpour and you being a neighbor, if you don't share the same side of the street, then in a sense a child would in fact had to have crossed over the street. She would have in fact had to cross over the street in order for her to even bypass the neighbor's house. And then not only that, if she was to end up walking to say get over to where she's trying to go on Highway 18, would she in fact have needed to cross her own street? Because see how some of these streets are laid out as in the layout plan. Sometimes you can leave out your house and say where you're going. This might be your house right here. And say your neighbor is on the other side of the street. You might be going, and where you're going, the destination is somewhat out that way. As in it's facing how your house is facing, right? And then your neighbor could be facing, your house facing this way, your neighbor's facing your house, but they're completely down the street. But in order to go completely out in that direction in which your house is facing is to know you might have to cross the street. To walk past your neighbor to go down, say, some side street to get on the main road to get to Highway 18. And yet, if that is not in fact the direction in which you're going to get to Highway 18 or get to wherever the destination is, it's to possibly stay on your side of your street. Stay on the same side of the street that you are on and stay on that path without crossing over. It should go directly straight. And say if your destination is pointed backwards, say not behind your house but in that direction on another street, it's to know you're kind of forced to stay on your side of the street. And yet, once again, what side did the neighbor live on? That in itself can help tell a lot as well. Because to not be able to see where you're going in the middle of the night or early in the morning, even in a dark road, even on a dark street such as your neighborhood street, is to know a neighbor possibly may have not seen you, as in an eyewitness. That neighbor may have not seen that child. That's what I'm trying to say. Because how would a neighbor even know? I understand Asha wearing bow ties and all that other stuff in her hair, but even by then, by the time she got up towards wherever the house was where the neighbor lived enough to see her, even those bow ties in her hair would have almost been drenched enough, if not semi-drenched, which means they would have been weighted down and not completely skyward enough to see, well, that's Asha, because I know her by her bow ties. They would have been flat on her head and flat on her face. And not only that, her hair would have been flat. Like how my hair is standing like this. That child's hair would have been completely flat by being consumed by rain. So how would the neighbor in fact have known that was Asha? Because to have flat hair on your face is really not to be able to see the full detail as in which it stands the face. I'm saying the neighbor could have seen anybody at that time. He might note her stature as in how tall she was and even her bodily, but anybody could possess that. Asha's brother probably could possess that. Any child on that block could possess that same type of form as in child bodily form. Once again, for her hair to get drenched is to know your bow ties is going to be drenched. And not only that, your hair is going to be sticking to your face. Because if it's drenching like this, trust and believe, by the time you get towards a few houses down, your hair is going to be messed up. It has no choice. It's like buckets of water falling on you with puddles added on top. So there will be no way for that neighbor to fully identify who you are. And then not only that, how could the neighbor know what type of clothes she was wearing? I'm saying as in, if it was really her, was it her? To begin with, how would the neighbor even know that was Asia, even based upon her clothes? That's a question in itself. How does a neighbor know a child's form of fashion, as in what they wear in the middle of the night going to bed, and yet they don't wear that very clothing on the outside? How does a neighbor know that? It was said that she had on, what was that, her white nightgown, right? With the little cartoon, I believe it was Tweety Bird, if I'm right or wrong, say so. And not only that, she had white jeans up underneath it. And then she had white sneakers on. But she didn't have on no coat. So, how could the neighbor know that was her if she haven't wore this type of outfit outside? And even on the playground, because remember, to sleep in some clothes is to never be caught found even standing still outside the four walls of your house with that very thing on. Your nightgown, I'm saying, as well as your jeans up underneath it, and your shoes, white tennis shoes. That's weird in itself. Because I'm thinking, if a neighbor seen a young child, say, moving on foot in a nightgown, wouldn't the neighbor still know in fact something was wrong with this child, to know that she's outside the middle of the night, outside walking around in even her nightgown with pants underneath? Because see, most of these nightgowns are much more longer than a regular shirt, because they sit on top. And if you drape them over your pants and not tuck them in, it's still going to be draped down long. So how could a neighbor, unless their vision was blocked, let that very thing bypass their eyes, that in fact this young girl has on a nightgown? A neighbor, the neighbor that the father mentioned in the 911 call. How does a neighbor, because see, even if Asia was drenched almost to the point of, say, getting towards the end of her street or wherever this neighbor live at, the neighbor would have in fact recognized that she had on a nightgown. Because remember, to be rained upon in that type of water is to know that shirt is a little bit too long. That shirt, first of all, is a little bit too long to be worn outside. And even at this time, where is your coat, young girl? Because even the coat set on top of that thing would look shady in itself. Say if Asia would have took her coat and she had on a nightgown, knowing that nightgowns are really, really long and can be much more extra long if they get drenched in the rain. Because rain let things hang down more lower than they should. She wore a coat on top of that. If she would have, then a neighbor would have really been in deep suspicion of even that. Like, this child is a night walker. And yet she couldn't have been a sleepwalker, because even her parents would have known that. But the neighbor would have known this child is in fact a night walker, because who takes it upon themselves to just walk outside in the middle of the night, early morning, before the sun has hit the horizon, in their nightgown? It is so sad to say, and yet I believe and can sense that this child might in fact be dead. I don't want to say that, but yet I keep sensing that very thing, that she's more than likely dead. And yet to continue to have a positive mind and to not throw that out there, but you got to still outweigh everything. Why is a young child supposedly outside her house after midnight walking around? Did I say Tweety Bird on her? I think it was a teddy bear. I'm sorry, on her nightgown. Tweety Bird, teddy bear. Why is a young child in fact walking around in her home environment and then take it upon herself to leave out in a nightgown, and eyewitnesses are seeing this very thing before their very eyes, supposedly. Why is that? And then you're completely unfound. Police gonna have to trace back. They're gonna have to do a trace by trace, as in a step by step. A proper, thorough, as in redoing. See, police, FBI, they're gonna have to do a trace by trace, as in step by step, properly, thoroughly, as in going back all over again, because to undercover something as in a mystery is to probably see it in which it really stands. Thoroughly, as in combing through bits and pieces of information, and not just big broadcasts and big chunks of information of the big picture, the wider scope. Go down with this matter. Go, if you see a problem that's big, and I spoke on this before, to have a life problem, even in your everyday life, instead of going big, you go small. You go tiny piece by piece, as in layer, specks by specks. You don't do things in big chunks. That's not going to help resolve anything. To trace back, see, I'm the type of individual, and me tracing back, I will even go as far as the young child's hair bow. I will. As in how wet it was. Was it even wet at all? Was it dry at all? I'm telling you, I'm the type of person, if you ask me to try to solve something, if you tell me, look, I need you to take the time for a minute, sit with us to try to solve this. If police was to ever get me involved on an investigation, they big time in the realm of what they're doing, they would never need a young individual like me. And yet, who knows? Because they're highly more advanced than me. And yet, once again, to trace back on something is to go very small. They done that already in their investigation, even with that pencil, and supposedly it said, what did it say? Did it say Georgia or something like that on that? The pencil, or Atlanta or something like that? To go small. It's to not even put those small pieces together in chunks. It's to even go much more smaller than that. The child's bows. See, the hair bows, I'm telling you, to try to figure out something is to run circles around that thing in what you're trying to solve. Piece by piece. What does each small item represent? That's what I'm trying to say. Each tiny item represents something. Even something as small as a hair bow. So, a hair bow would, in fact, if it got wet, I'm sorry, I'm looking at some soup sitting here. A hair bow. I got a table full of soup. Anyway, a hair bow. If a hair bow is on a young child's head in the middle of the night, early morning, in the rain, then that hair bow has to in fact be wet, as in drenched, even when it's found the next day by Turner Upholstery, the lady in which found, her name was Debbie, the lady that found the young child's items, small items. And so if the young child's hair bow was in fact not wet, as in completely drenched, then that's in fact to know that somebody could have taken it upon themselves, say if they did kidnap her and run away with her, they could have in fact take the hair bow off the young child's head and have planted it there in that shed. In Turner Upholstery, is that what you call it? They could have in fact planted it there. And yet, once again, I stand in question of even how dry the hair bow was. Because even that in itself tell a story. Yes, a hair bow does. It can tell a story. That hair bow can tell you how far that young child has even walked in the rain. Because to get too wet is to be completely drenched by the time you get to where you're going. And say somebody want to take the hair bow out and put it in a shed. It's to know that hair bow is going to be so wet in February, it's going to almost be frostbitten itself, enough going into the next day of that woman finding it at the shed. And not only that, it being handed over to police for their investigation. That type of thing would have soaked up a lot of water. Sitting there in that type of weather, it would have. And it being confiscated by police, that could show, that hair bow in itself could show a whole bunch more. Because I'm sure they had to, if the hair bow was in fact wet, they possibly had to let it dry out. How they let it dry out, crime investigation rooms or whatever police got set up, they had to let that dry out. And then I'm sure they possibly had to brush it or something for fingerprint, to see if there was a man's fingerprint. I'm thinking. But even if that hair bow was in fact dry, then that shows something in itself. That showed, if the hair bow was in fact dry, then it showed that Asia was not on that road to begin with. She could have in fact been possibly in somebody's car. And yet I still don't think that's possible as well. I'll make a video about that. I don't think that's possible as well for a young child to say, get in the car, right, and let some man who she's going with, even if she's excited to be going on her supposed adventure, she's not going to sit out in the field in the darkness. Because remember, there's no street lights, right? To go hide a car as in park it away is to not allow that car to be seen off the road somewhere. So it's got to be parked in some field somewhere enough to not be seen. And so for a young child to sit there and wait is to know that is not going to happen. That little girl possibly will scream and cry because she don't want to be left nowhere in no field like that by herself. And more than likely, he's not going to allow that car to be running because anybody could be out in the field late at night. So you don't want to draw attention to you. So I don't think that happened, that the little girl possibly sat and wait out in the field middle somewhere while he went and go planted this bow and this other stuff after he done took it out her hair. Because he took it out her hair and it's dry. So that's why I'm saying if she was in a car, then in fact that will point to that because it will be dry, the bow. Understand sciences, man. The map of sciences will point you in all totally different directions. So was her hair bow wet or dry? That's going to be my next video. I'll make another video about that. Was this young child's hair bow wet or dry? See, I gotta make some more videos. They coming on the way. A wet hair bow a wet hair bow is one of those type of things that won't allow you to be hanging in the mystery. It won't. Trust and believe me when I say that. A wet hair bow if it was in fact wet. Because it will tell you that individual was in fact outside walking. They had to be, because for something to be too drenched is to show that very thing. And yet for something such as that small item piece being that very close to her, on her, is to show that she might have not, in fact, if it was dry, may have not been on that road. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking, which is why I'm pausing. Because how else would somebody have access to her house enough to even get hair bows? They had to have, in fact, pulled one off her head. I'm thinking enough to plan it. Because why would somebody tell her to pack some hair bows? Because if they would have told her to pack one hair bow, they would have told her to pack many hair bows. And those hair bows would have been listed on the list, in which they're not. So, more than likely, that hair bow was, in fact, taken or pulled off that young child's head to be planted in with evidence. Because, see, if you're going to tell somebody to pack something, as in their favorite things and all this other stuff, you know that the young child's hair bows are possibly a favorite. They might have not always been a favorite, but to wear too much, something too much and get used to it, it's to possibly be a favorite. But then once again, children love color. So I'm sure her hair bows was a favorite to her. I said before, those type of things marvel a young child. And yet to direct and guide a child to pack sort of things such as that, even hair bows, and not recognize those very things in the bag, such as a hair bow, is to know she was not in fact guided, as in directed, to pack that thing. Hair bows to go along with her outfit. So to go back in reverse and ask, well, where did the hair bow come from? It could have not come from any other place than on the child's head. And it possibly endured the elements if she was in fact out there. To solve pieces is to put them together. Because I stand in question of even that. How many people even question of where the hair bow could have even came from? If it came from in her bag or whatnot. Some people overlook this sort of thing. They do. And that's not to say ignorance, and that's not to say common sense, but some people do overlook this sort of thing because to once again not make a big thing, as in make enough noise about this sort of thing, is to know it's been completely overlooked. Even in the realm of, say, her pencil that was found and the green marker that was found. Those sort of things are personal things, as invaluable things to a young child, but still not enough completely to pay attention to. You do pay attention to those things, but you're more likely going to pay attention to what was on that individual, which played a part even in all of this, as in the story unfolding, telling out. A bow, I would say, is more valuable than even pencils and markers being found. It's a very personal item, despite the pencil and the marker being something valued by the child. It is. Because see, pencils and markers can be something which is used by a child, right? But those sort of things, such as a pencil, oftentimes get grinded down to the fact that it gets thrown away, as well as a marker sometimes run out of the ink or whatever you call it, the dye that's in the marker. So sooner or later that sort of thing has to be thrown away, right? But a bow really doesn't unravel really too quickly. Those sort of things last much longer because some of these bows are in fact glued to plastic. I mean, they can fall out, but it's been known sometimes parents to actually glue a bow back on the actual plastic of where it had fell out. Trust and believe, you see a lot of things growing up in the hood as a kid. Yes, you do. You see some ghetto rig stuff, or say a bow being glued back to a piece of plastic because the parent didn't want to throw the child's bow away because it was too cute. So to keep it, you just glue it where it's messed up or damaged. So pens as well as markers are more of knick-knack items. They're more thrown away items, right? Because to lose ink in a pencil, to lose lead, as well as a marker, to lose dye, is to throw those things away. And yet the police can't throw that away because as evidence, fingerprints could be on it, but more than likely might not be. But with a bow tie, that sort of thing people like to keep, as in not throwing away. I'm saying the mother, child, father, whoever. They're treasure items. There's people that in fact revere bows, like hair bows and stuff like that, because it represents almost like a nature of loving flowers and stuff like that. People that love that type of stuff get into that. Even children. So that's why I said about the bow. The Mickey Mouse, was it a Mickey Mouse bow? That's a very treasure item that you would scope out on more so than say these candy wrappers. And yet even that could identify, because as they took it to the schools and asked the kids if they could identify the wrappers, as if that's where she got it from. And yet that hair bow still stands out the most. It has to. Let me wait for this clock to go off. I'm going to take the battery out. I keep saying that, yet I'll be forgetting because I'm still on camera. But the bow stands out the most because it can point you to what in fact may have happened. during the time period. It can. When I make the other video, I'm going to say much more in relation to the bow. I'm going to specifically make a video just for the bow by itself. We're going to honor the bow to try to see what comes out as I'm talking. Try to figure out. Man. That's too much. Because see, with even a bow, even if an adult was involved, and say with all this, even in the walking process, that's why I said about that bow, because if it was wet, then that lets you know that there was in fact a lot of walking involved. If it wasn't wet, from either Asia herself or even from an adult that took it there and planted it there. Even if that individual had to park somewhere off the road, as I said before, and plant that bow, because how are you going to be planting some items like that without you being even seen or found yourself driving a vehicle in which other people can identify at that sort of time? That means that individual had to take it upon themselves to get out and walk. Of course, because police said in the record something about this individual could have been a woodsman, understanding woods, right? And I spoke of even that individual could have played football in a past, because to know how far 50 yards out is to know how far ought to go, even with a flashlight, as well as return to where you're going back to, whether it's out on the road or even farther out in the woods to where the car is parked at. Maybe that person's car was parked out much more farther than 50 yards, who knows? And yet the bow, something about the bow could lead you to even all that, as in a scope out. I'm thinking. Because see, candy wrappers can only take you so far. Candy wrappers, when you do a measurement on candy wrappers, the police went to the school, they asked the children a question if they knew of these candies, in which I believe the kids said they knew, or whether the candies was or wasn't there, as in part of the school as where they came from, and Asia having them in her possession, right? So you kind of strike that out of the equation, because we already know that they was planted, which mean a grown man or woman took it upon themselves to plant it. So you kind of remove that out of the equation somewhat, as in going down. When I said deciphering down, you kind of move it over. The pen and pencil, the pencil and the marker, even that. Some people try to leave you clues with that type of thing when they playing a little sickly mind game like certain pedophiles do, or child murderers. They will try to plant certain things like that to give you clues, and then trying to find out who it was, right? And yet, and still, nothing completely points you there more so than the bow. Because the bow shows where the child may have been, say, in the middle of the night. Because to be wet or dry is to show you that particular thing. I'm going to end this video out. I think that's all to be said for now. If I can upload this, hurry up and upload this. Takes forever to upload, but yeah, more videos is coming on the way. Remember what I said before, to repeat something is clarity. To burn something into somebody's memory, when I spoke back on Asia not forgetting her panties and socks, to do something enough as in saying it in repetitious style is to burn that very thing in your memory of never forgetting. And that's why I repeat. Oftentimes I repeat 5 or 6 times. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So you know. But yeah, I am now ending out.